Should you disable cores for the GPD Win 5 or similar handheld and mini PC devices with the AMD Strix Halo chips? To find that out, I've tested both versions of the GPD Win 5 with only 6 and 4 cores enabled to compare the results with the performance of the handhelds in their original state, meaning 16 cores for the AI Max Plus 395 and 8 cores for the AI Max 385. For that, I ran and recorded lots and lots of benchmarks at 17 watt, 35 watt and 75 watt, and we will have a look at the side-by-side benchmarks in a bit. Both units are equipped with 32 GB of RAM and the VRAM size was set to 8 GB. By the way, disabling cores on the GPD Win 5 is super easy. All you need is a keyboard which you attach to the device. Turn on your GPD Win 5, keep hitting delete on startup until you're in the BIOS, switch over to advanced. Once here, choose AMD overclocking, then manual CPU overclocking, CPU core count control, and here we can activate and deactivate cores by using ones and zeros for each CCD, meaning 1 to 16 active cores for the Max Plus 395 and 1 to 8 active cores for the Max 385. And now without further ado, let's jump right into the benchmarks. For Assassin's Creed Shadows, I was actually using the low preset to get somewhat playable FPS. And at 17 watt, I was seeing 27 FPS on average with all cores enabled, and already a big improvement of 33 FPS when I only enabled 6 cores for the AI Max Plus 395, and even a bit better average of 34 FPS with only 4 cores enabled. While we can see that the frame time graph is starting to look a bit weird, but it didn't seem to really affect the 1% lows, but a frame time graph like that is a bit suspicious to me, so I would probably go with 6 cores here. However, that is an improvement of over 20%. Now interestingly, when I was using 35 watt instead, the improvement wasn't as big as before. For the 16 core setting, I was getting an average of 66 FPS with the same low preset, and only 3 FPS more, so 69 FPS on average with 6 cores enabled. So the difference is marginal at best, and when I was choosing 4 cores, it was even 1 FPS less than before, but this time at least the frame time graph looked alright. And the 1% lows didn't really seem to be affected here at all. And then again, at the 75 watt profile, I was getting 5 FPS more, which is, in this case, is around 6 to 7% more FPS. 85 FPS on average in the original vanilla state with the 16 cores enabled, 90 FPS on average with the 6 cores enabled, and 89 FPS with the 4 cores enabled. However, as you can see, disabling cores makes sense in this case for all wattage settings. For Cyberpunk 2077, I was using the medium preset with FSR on quality at 1080p, and using the 17 watt profile, we can see that once again, I did get an improvement. To be specific, it was 3 FPS, which is not that much. That's not even 10%. In this case, it's like 6 to 7%. For the 16 core version, I was getting 43 FPS, 46 FPS for the 6 core setting, and even 47 FPS for the 4 core setting. And as you can see, interestingly, for the 4 core setting, it seems that the 1% lows haven't been affected, or to be honest, they even look a bit better here, which is quite interesting because Cyberpunk 2077 is a pretty demanding game CPU wise. And as you can see, the utilization of the GPU even is lower for the 4 core version, and the CPU utilization is much higher. It's almost bottlenecking with 4 cores. Using the 35 watt setting for Cyberpunk 2077, I still saw an improvement. Once again, 5 FPS this time, 87 FPS with the 16 cores enabled, and 92 FPS with 6 cores enabled. So that's 5 FPS more, and the same FPS on average with the 4 cores enabled, so I didn't gain any additional FPS for the 4 core setting. And well, using the 75 watt setting, I saw very high 132 FPS on average with 16 cores enabled, and even higher 137 FPS with 6 cores enabled, while it was only 134 with 4 cores enabled, so it didn't seem to make much sense using the 75 watt profile in combination with 4 cores here. Now the next title is Counter-Strike 2, which is pretty CPU demanding and depending a lot on the CPU performance, which we will see in a bit. However, using the 17 watt profile, I was seeing an average of 160 FPS using the 16 cores on the AI Max Plus 395 and an average of 170 FPS with 6 cores enabled. So that's an improvement of 10 FPS. That's not nothing. It's not that much, but it's visible and it's measurable, definitely. However, using 4 cores only didn't seem to make a big difference here at all, maybe even within the margin of error. Now using the 35 watt profile instead, this machine is really getting high FPS for Counter-Strike 2 using the low preset, 293 FPS on average with 16 cores enabled and already 310 FPS with only 6 cores enabled. So an improvement of, well, 17 FPS, which is not that much in this high FPS region, but still it's noticeable and measurable. Only 301 though for 4 cores enabled, so it seems as if using 6 cores is the sweet spot for Counter-Strike 2. And that is confirmed using the 75 watt profile, because we're getting an average of 321 FPS with 16 enabled cores for the AI Max Plus 395 and already 360 FPS on average with only 6 cores enabled. So that's almost 40 FPS more, and that's around 12% in this case. That's not too bad. So it seems like this chip really benefits from reducing cores for gaming. At least for most games, it's not the same for every game, as you will see later. But for Forza Horizon 5, it seems to make a lot of sense as well. Using the high preset at 1080p, I saw an average of 56 FPS using 16 cores and already 68 FPS on average using 6 cores. So that is 12 FPS more, which is quite a lot in this case. Though for the 4-core setting, it didn't seem to make any difference. Once again, 68 FPS. That's over 20% more though. And well, using the 35 watt profile, the difference was now very small. An average of 121 FPS using the 16 cores and only a bit more with 125 FPS using the 6 cores. So in this case, it didn't seem to really make a lot of difference. 4 FPS, well, it's better than nothing, but it doesn't really matter that much. And I don't know why, but then again, using the 75 watt profile for Forza Horizon 5 on the high preset at 1080p, here it seemed to make a big difference once more. 131 FPS on average for the vanilla 16 core setup and much higher 153 FPS for the 6 core setup. So that's 22 FPS more. I don't know why it's so much more here. And now look what happens when we are using 4 cores only. In this scenario, it's 161 FPS, so that's even 30 FPS more. I'm not really sure why it didn't make much more difference using the 35 watt profile compared to using the 75 watt profile. It's just maybe the CPU is getting more power here as well, and as the game does not need too many cores, each core gets more power and it's just able to push more FPS. I'm not really sure. For Red Dead Redemption 2, I was using the hardware unboxed preset at 1080p with FSR on quality, and using the 17 watt profile, it didn't really seem to matter if 16 cores or 6 cores or 4 cores were enabled. The average FPS have basically been the same with 43 FPS versus 44 FPS on average. However, using the 35 watt profile, I even saw a slight degradation of FPS using 6 or 4 cores only, though that is within the margin of error, to be honest. Now using the 35 watt profile, it seemed as if the game doesn't like reducing the cores here. 86 FPS on average for the 16 core vanilla setting and only 79 FPS, which is 7 FPS less for the 6 core version, and even only 70 FPS for the 4 core setting. So that's 16 FPS less in that case. If Red Dead Redemption 2 is one of your main games you play, you should think about reducing the core count in that case, or well, change it every time you launch the game, which is a bit annoying. Now for Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I was using the medium preset at 1080p, And to be honest, the core count didn't seem to make a big difference using the 17 watt profile. 47 FPS on average for 16 enabled cores, 48 for 6 enabled cores, and 49 FPS for 4 enabled cores, probably within the margin of error. And the same applied to using the 35 watt profile instead, 101 FPS versus 100 and 101 FPS on average. Once again, using the medium preset at 1080p, so at least in those scenarios, it doesn't matter how many cores are active. Though interestingly, using the 75 watt profile, I saw 129 FPS on average using the 16 cores, a bit less, 127 FPS using 6 cores only, and then 5 FPS more using 4 cores only, which is a bit weird because it's so inconsistent. I'm not too sure what to make of that, to be honest. And the last tested game for the AI Max Plus 395 is The Witcher 3, using the medium preset using the DirectX 11 mode at 1080p. Well, it didn't really make a difference if I use 16 cores, 6 cores or 4 cores. And as we will see, the same is applying to the 35 watt profile. We are seeing basically the same average FPS. Also, the 1% lows don't really seem to be affected by this that much. So in this case, it doesn't really matter. I was expecting a bigger difference, but then again, it could be, to be honest, it could be that at some other wattages, like at 20 or 25 watt, it does make a bigger difference. But testing all wattages with all core counts in so many games is basically impossible time-wise. And then just to make it complete, using the 75 watt profile for The Witcher 3 at medium preset at 1080p, 144 FPS on average using 16 cores, 145 FPS using 6 cores, and a bit less, 142 FPS using 4 cores only. So in that case, it doesn't really matter. Now for the Ryzen AI Max 385 version instead, using 17 watt profile at Assassin's Creed Shadows with the low preset and FSR and performance at 1080p. The difference between 8, 6 or 4 active cores is basically non-existent. We're seeing an average of 35 versus 35 versus 36 FPS. So let's jump to the 35 watt profile instead. Oh, but before we do that, in case you haven't noticed, if you compare the CPU utilization in today's video, you will see that for the higher core count, the CPU utilization usually is much lower compared to the lesser core settings, which is, well, logical, because less cores means all the cores have to work more compared to, let's say you have 16 cores, then probably only half of them are active at all. And from these 8 active cores, only a few are really utilized to the max. So that's why that is happening. Also using the 35 watt profile, we are once again not seeing a difference in that case. 63 FPS on average for the 8 core setting, 64 FPS on average for the 6 core setting, and 63 FPS on average for the 4 core setting, all within the margin of error. No difference at all. Let's see what's happening with 75 watt instead. Now here we are, for whatever reason, seeing a pretty big difference of over 10%. 74 FPS on average for the 8 cores and 83 FPS on average for the 6 cores versus 85 FPS for 4 active cores only. And I don't know what's happening here. Once again, that's a pretty big difference, almost noticeable, even without showing numbers. So if you're into Assassin's Creed Shadows, you probably should deactivate some cores here. And we're seeing a similar picture for Cyberpunk 2077 at medium settings with FSR and quality at 1080p. Basically no difference between 8, 6 and 4 active cores for the AI Max 385 here. And if we jump over to the 35 watt profile, that's just basically the same. 89 FPS on average for the 8 cores, 89 FPS on average for 6 cores, and well, 91 FPS for 4 active cores, which probably still is within the margin of error, though at least it does not seem to harm the average FPS or the 1% lows in a noticeable way. And well, just like in Assassin's Creed Shadows, we're finally seeing a bit bigger difference for the 75 watt TDP profile, 121 FPS on average for 8 active cores, 127 FPS for 6 active cores, and 125 for 4 cores. So seems like 6 cores would be the way to go here to get a few free FPS. And interestingly, just like with the 395, we're not seeing a noticeable difference for the 17 watt profile using the AI Max 385. In Forza Horizon 5, using the high preset at 1080p, a very small difference of 1 FPS only within the margin of error. However, using the 35 watt profile, we are already seeing a noticeable difference of 9 FPS when reducing to 6 cores, and even higher 13 FPS when I was reducing to 4 cores only for the AI Max 385 with the Radeon 8050S. And just like with the AI Max Plus 395, Forza Horizon 5 seems to really love less cores, because we are seeing a big difference of 17 FPS improvement for 6 versus 8 cores, and even 30 FPS for 4 versus 8 cores. So that's quite noticeable, and well, something is going on here, or the game just prefers less cores for whatever reason. But it's 3 FPS, and if you play a lot of Forza Horizon 5, you definitely should reduce the cores on Strix Halo chips or machines with that chip like the GPD Win 5. Also, just another quick look at Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 for the 385, and we'll make that quick for the 17 and the 35 watt profile. Not a big difference here, like no difference at all for the 17 watt profile, and a very small difference, as you can see here, for the 35 watt profile. Though, again, using the 75 watt TDP profile for the GPD Win 5 AI Max 385 version, we're getting 3 FPS. It's not a lot, but a few, in that case 5, for the less core setting. So for the 8 cores, we're getting 104 FPS on average, 109 for the 6 and 4 core setting. And well, it's just 3 FPS, just take it. And the last test for today in this video is going to be Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Once again, medium setting at 1080p. And at 17 watt, we're not seeing any difference once again, but using the 35 watt profile in this case, in opposite to the AI Max Plus 395, here we are already seeing an improvement using the 35 watt profile with 89 FPS for 8 cores and already 97 for 6 cores, and even a bit better 99 FPS on average for 4 cores only. And well, that is once more than 10% more FPS. And a similar outcome for the 75 watt profile in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Well, 10 to 14 FPS more. They are free. Just take them, reduce the cores if you play that game. Or, well, to be honest, it probably would make a lot of sense if you're playing a few games only. Just try it out yourself if you're getting more FPS reducing cores. It's not the case for every game. And in some very rare scenarios, it was reducing the FPS. But in most cases, it was giving us 3 extra FPS. Now, depending on the game and the core count, we are seeing different results, because sometimes we might be running into a GPU bottleneck and sometimes a CPU bottleneck when reducing the number of active cores. Now, as expected for the AI Max Plus 395 version, it helps a bit to reduce the active cores to 6 only compared to the vanilla settings with 16 active cores, most likely because 17 watt is not enough to power 16 cores and an iGPU, or at least that can be improved a bit. Though, even when using 35 watt, we're seeing a slight improvement of 4 FPS, which equals to around 3%. And for some reason, at a TDP of 75 watt, we're seeing the biggest difference with an improvement of 9 FPS on average, in today's tested games at least, which equals over 6% in this case. Because the cheaper AI Max 385 version with the Radeon 8050M only comes with 8 cores to begin with, one would think reducing to 6 cores doesn't make that much of a difference here, which is kinda true using a low TDP of 17 watt only, but at a TDP of 35 watt we are already seeing an improvement of around 5 to 6% And in the 5 tested games of today using the 75 watt profile, that improves to a respectable 9 to 12% using 6 or even only 4 cores. PS, due to a lack of time, I was not testing the same amount of games for the 385, so you cannot compare the average FPS for the two handhelds in this case, sorry. However, to be honest, me personally, I would usually prefer 6 to 8 cores for gaming, because that leaves us some headroom for background tasks, especially when you're using Windows instead of Bassite. But it seems as reducing the core count is giving us some free FPS in most games and most scenarios. I'll also try out undervolting and overclocking the chips in one of my next videos, so make sure to subscribe to find out if we can squeeze out even some more FPS on these two here. To be very clear, this video is not sponsored at all, and I bought both handhelds with my own money at gpd-minipc.com, where they are relatively cheap in comparison, while they will of course also be affected by the current RAM crisis. However, I was still able to get a discount code of $50 on your order at gpd-minipc.com if you want to try them out yourself with the code Hubwood. So make sure you'll use my link below in the comments or in the description. Keep in mind, they could temporarily be sold out right now. And for me in Germany, the shipping took around 3 weeks. While I didn't have any issues with taxes, I didn't have to pay anything, considering that for both packages, which have been sent in separate deliveries. And that's all for today's video. If you enjoyed the content, make sure to like the video and or subscribe to the channel for more stuff related to the GPD Win 5s, laptops, mini PCs and gaming handhelds. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time. Bye bye and tschüss.